The silence is a living thing. It breathes, it presses. It has weight and texture and temperature, and right now it is cold enough to stop a heart. She stands at the altar of St. Cuthbert's Chapel in a gown the colour of old cream, and the lace at her wrists is so stiff it has left marks on her skin, and the smell of damp lilies is everywhere. Not the smell of celebration, but the smell of flowers cut too soon, placed in water that will not keep them, destined to begin dying from the moment they were arranged. She knows a great deal about things that begin dying from the moment they are arranged. To her left is Sir Julian Vane. She does not look at him. She has not looked at him in 11 days, which is the precise number of days since she found the papers in his study. The papers with the doctor's signature already affixed, the ones that would see her committed before the ink on the marriage register had properly dried. She has been breathing through that knowledge for 11 days. She has become very practiced at breathing through unbearable things. To her right, at the far edge of her sight, pressed against the shadows the November light makes through the stained glass, is a man she has sent exactly one letter to in her life. She wrote it at 3 o'clock in the morning 3 nights ago by the light of a single tallow candle that kept threatening to gutter out. She wrote 4 drafts and burned 3. She addressed the 4th one simply, A.S. Ironwood, and she told him not what she felt. She would not give him that, but what she had, what she could offer. The one thing a man like Arthur Sterling, Duke of Ironwood, should have no interest in whatsoever. She offered him the truth. The priest has just asked if there is any impediment. The silence stretches. It has been perhaps 4 seconds. It feels like a year of her life. And Arthur Sterling, Duke of Ironwood, does not move. He stands with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes fixed on Elara's face, and the expression he wears is not mercy, and it is not love, and it is not urgency. It is something she has no name for, which is perhaps the most frightening thing that has ever happened to her. She has a name for everything. She has catalogued every expression of every person in every room she has ever entered. She has had to. It has been her survival. She cannot name what she sees on his face now. The candles at the altar have burned for some time. The wax has begun to run. Pale ribbons of it tracking slowly down the iron holders, pooling at the base, nobody having noticed or thought to address it. There are perhaps 40 people in the pews. She has counted them without meaning to. It is the kind of thing her mind does automatically, inventorying a room for exits, for threats, for the precise geometry of how many bodies stand between her and the door. 5 seconds now. Her father is in the second pew on the left. She can hear him breathing. She has always been able to hear her father breathing in rooms where she ought not be able to. It is some particular cruelty of acoustics, or love, or both. He is an old man now, older than his years, ruined in the specific way that gambling and pride and weakness ruin a man slowly from the inside, so that by the time the outside shows it, there is not much left to save. She loves him anyway. She has never been able to help that. The priest clears his throat. Julian Vane shifts his weight, and she can feel his satisfaction from here, the particular warmth of a man who believes he has already won. And then Arthur Sterling draws a breath. She hears it. In that cold stone chapel, over the sound of 40 people breathing, and candles burning, and winter pressing at the old leaded windows, she hears the Duke of Ironwood draw a single, deliberate breath. She does not know yet that everything is about to change. She does not know yet that she sent him the one letter he could not burn. She only knows that the silence is ending, and that whatever comes after it will be the thing she carries for the rest of her life, however long or short that life turns out to be. Hold that image with me for just a moment. The cold chapel, the melting candles, the woman standing at the altar with a rusted key hidden beneath the silk of her wedding gown, pressed against her hip where no one can see it, where she has to touch it just to remember she is real. Now come with me. There is so much you need to know before we return to that altar. Let me take you back to where all of this truly began. But first, I wonder where you are listening from today. Are you tucked into a quiet chair somewhere, the rain doing its work against a window nearby? Are you driving through the dark with nothing but the road ahead of you? Wherever you are, I am glad you are here. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to subscribe to Whispered Thrones if you have not already done so. We are building something here together, a circle of listeners who believe that the best stories are the ones that make you feel less alone. If you do not subscribe, I shall be forced to call in a favor later, and you can trust me when I say that my favors tend to come at inconvenient moments. Now, let me tell you about a woman named Elara Vance, and why she was standing at that altar at all. The estate of Blackwood sits on the edge of a moor that cannot decide whether it belongs to Yorkshire or Durham, and has given up trying. It is the kind of landscape that changes its character with the weather, golden and almost tender in late summer, brutal and dark in November, which is most of November. The house itself is handsome in a faded, determined way, like a woman who has not had new dresses in years, but still carries herself with precision. The east wing roof has a slow leak that worsens every winter. The kitchen garden produces less than it used to. The carpets in the front hall have been turned once already, and you can see the ghosts of old patterns in the parts that face the wall. Elara Vance grew up in this house, and she loves it the way you love a thing that has also wounded you, completely, without condition, while knowing exactly what it cost. She was 22 that November, small and given to stillness, the kind of stillness that made people in crowded rooms uneasy, because it felt like being watched by someone who was deciding something about you. Her hair was dark, her hands were ink-stained more often than not, and she wore a small rusted key on a ribbon around her waist, tucked beneath her dress, pressed against her skin. She had found the key years ago in the back of a drawer, and she had never discovered what it unlocked, and she had kept it anyway. There was something she needed about holding a key that had no door. It reminded her that some things kept their purpose, even when the thing they were made for was gone. She was the daughter of Edmund Vance, Earl of Blackwood, a title that had grown so threadbare it was nearly translucent, an earldom in name only, the land mortgaged to a dozen different parties, and the house itself held together by habit and stubbornness. Edmund Vance was not a cruel man. That is perhaps the hardest part of the whole story. He was a weak man, which in some ways causes more damage, because cruelty you can fight and weakness you can only watch. He had gambled through 2 fortunes, his wife's and his own, with the particular cheerful optimism of a man who always believed the next hand would be better. It never was. By the time Elara was old enough to understand what ledgers meant, the ledgers were already nearly empty. She understood what ledgers meant very early. That was the other thing about Elara Vance. She was brilliant. Not in the decorative way that wealthy families sometimes permitted their daughters to be brilliant, a little French, a little watercolour, a little pianoforte. She was brilliant in the way that made estate managers and solicitors uncomfortable, because she could read a set of accounts in 20 minutes and find the irregularities they had hidden in an hour. And she had once written a letter to her father's primary creditor at the age of 18 that was so precise in its argument and so devastating in its logic that the creditor had extended the debt by 6 months rather than argue with it. She had written that letter without telling her father. She had written a dozen letters after it. It had become, without her fully choosing it, the work of her life, holding Blackwood together through the sheer force of her attention, managing what she could, writing letters that bought time she had no other way to purchase. She did not know for a very long time that anyone was reading those letters. She had been promised to Julian Vane since she was 6 years old. That was the agreement, a blood debt her father had incurred in some long-ago business that Elara had never fully been given the details of, because she was a daughter, and daughters were not given details. They were given outcomes. The outcome, in her case, was Julian Vane, a man 11 years her senior with a smooth face and restless hands and the specific quality of attention that makes the back of your neck prickle. He was not ugly. He was, in fact, considered handsome by the local society, which had always made Elara feel that local society was missing something essential about the nature of handsome. He had the kind of face that arranged itself well for occasions, agreeable at suppers, charming at dances, perfectly constructed for the moments when people were watching. It was the moments when people were not watching that she dreaded. She had been watching him for 16 years, and she knew the difference. The world in which all of this was unfolding was the north of England in 1818, which was neither one thing nor another. The old aristocratic order was still the order. Contracts were the law of God and Parliament, and a betrothal agreement from childhood could ruin you as thoroughly as a criminal conviction if you broke it. Debtor's prison was not a metaphor. It was a place with walls and a smell, and men went in and did not always come out in any meaningful sense. That was the world Elara's father lived in, every day, sustained only by the agreements that kept his creditors at bay, the most recent and most significant of which was the agreement that his daughter would marry Julian Vane by December. But the north of 1818 was also something new. The coal under the ground was making men rich who had no claim to any older kind of richness, men who had built their power not from inheritance, but from industry, from the mines and the shipping routes, and the cold exact science of knowing where the money was and how to move it. The greatest of these men, and the one whose shadow fell across every conversation about power in the north, was Arthur Sterling, Duke of Ironwood. She had heard of him long before she met him. Everyone had. He was the kind of figure that accumulates stories the way old houses accumulate damp, gradually, invisibly, until one day you notice and realize it has been happening for years. He controlled the coal output of half the north. He held mortgages on estates from the Durham coast to the edge of Derbyshire. He was 32 years old and had never married, which was either a mystery or a threat depending on who you asked. He did not attend most social gatherings. When he attended, the room reorganized itself around him without anyone having agreed to do so. She had formed a picture of him from the stories. The picture was of a man with no interior life, all transaction, all calculation, all surface, like a very expensive and perfectly maintained piece of machinery. She had thought, when she formed this picture, that she understood him. She was spectacularly wrong, but she would not discover that for some time yet. Her days that autumn had a particular shape. She rose early before the household was awake, often before there was enough light to read by, though she read anyway, squinting at the accounts by the first grey reach of dawn. She ate sparingly because the household ate sparingly. There was no drama in this, it was simply arithmetic. She walked the grounds every day regardless of weather, checking the walls, the fences, the condition of the tenant cottages that were still occupied, the slow creep of damp up the north face of the house. She was always calculating something, the distance between what was and what was needed. The gap between those two numbers was the shape of her life. In the evenings, if Julian Vane was not expected, she allowed herself an hour at her desk. She kept the desk locked. The key she wore around her waist was not the key to this desk. That key lived on her person in a different place, more carefully hidden. The desk drawer held her private accounts, a set of ledgers she had maintained for 6 years, tracking every transaction her father had made, every debt, every creditor, every extension and negotiation. She knew Blackwood's finances better than the solicitors did. She knew them better than her father did. She knew them, she sometimes thought in her darker moments, better than she knew herself. It was in those ledgers that she had first begun to notice something strange, a pattern in the debt repurchases, someone buying up her father's obligations, not demanding repayment, not applying pressure, simply absorbing the debts quietly, at market value, with no name attached. A ghost in the accounting. She had first noticed it 8 months ago, and had spent those 8 months trying to identify the creditor, writing careful, precisely worded inquiries that were met with the particular blankness of solicitors instructed to reveal nothing. She had not yet found the name. She had, however, formed a theory. Julian Vane had also formed a theory, and it was worse. That was the world as it stood in October of 1818, 10 weeks before the wedding, that nobody had asked Elara Vance if she wanted. It was raining the day she met him. Not the gentle, reluctant rain of early autumn, but proper November rain, determined and cold, the kind that found its way through wool and reason both, and made the world smell like wet earth and resignation. The occasion was a hunting party at Fenwick Hall, a property belonging to the Vane family's nearest neighbours, and Elara had been required to attend in the capacity that she was often required to attend things, as evidence. Evidence that there was still a Lady Vance, still a Blackwood, still a family worth the contract Julian was owed. She wore her best day dress, which was a deep green that had been fashionable 3 seasons ago, and remained respectable if you did not look too closely at the cuffs. The stable yard was chaos. Men and horses and dogs, and the particular loud confidence of men who hunt in all weather because they can afford to. Julian was there, immaculate despite the mud, doing the thing he always did in groups of men, performing himself, performing the role of Julian Vane of the Vane family, louder and sharper and more certain of his welcome than any reasonable assessment of the room would justify. He had found her horse and was making sport of it. The horse was a serviceable bay, older, a little stiff in the right foreleg. Julian was announcing to the group around him that it was a horse fit for a curate's widow, which produced the laughter it was designed to produce, and Elara stood at the edge of the yard and looked at the south wall of the stable. There was a crack running from the base of the second window to the foundation, maybe 7 feet long, maybe older than it appeared. She was calculating the water ingress, the rate of deterioration, whether the lintels were carrying what they needed to carry, when she became aware that she was being watched. Not the way Julian watched her, which was a form of possession. This was different, precise, clinical. She had the distinct sensation of being assessed. She turned. He was standing 8 feet away, just outside the shelter of the stable overhang, rain darkening the shoulders of his greatcoat. He was taller than she had imagined, which was saying something because she had imagined him tall. His face was not what she expected either. She had expected coldness, and she saw it, but it was not the coldness of emptiness. It was the coldness of a man who had chosen it, which was a different thing entirely. His hands were at his sides, and she looked at them the way she always looked at hands, because hands told you things about a person that their faces had learned to conceal. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, and the right thumb was ink-stained, and there was a roughness to them that had nothing to do with inherited wealth and everything to do with the kind of man who had stood inside his own mines. She felt something catch in her chest. She chose not to examine it. Julian called across the yard to her. He told her, his voice carrying the particular performance of inclusion that was actually the performance of ownership, that the Duke was interested in seeing her ride, and perhaps she ought to show them how Blackwood women sat a horse. There was a laughter in his voice, not loud laughter, the quieter kind, which is more humiliating. The horse Julian pointed to was not the bay. It was a grey, young, and not well-mannered, shifting and blowing at the end of its lead rope, white-eyed at the noise of the yard. A horse designed to cause a scene. Either she would struggle to mount it, which would be embarrassing, or she would mount it successfully and give Julian the satisfaction of having produced the entertainment, which was its own kind of loss. She looked at the grey horse for a moment. Then she looked at Arthur Sterling. He was watching her with that same precise attention, and there was something at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile. It was more than a smile's raw material, the thought of one, the possibility of one. He said nothing, but she had the impression that he was waiting to see what she would do, and that whatever she did would tell him something he wanted to know. She turned back to the grey horse, and she turned away from it, and she looked at Julian, and she said in a voice that carried just far enough, "I am not a creature for your wagering, Sir Julian." Then she looked at Arthur Sterling, and she said, "Nor yours, your grace." She walked back through the mud. Her best dress was ruined from the knee down by the time she reached the hall door. She did not look back. She did not know until much later that Arthur Sterling had watched her walk the entire way, and that what she had done had confirmed something he had suspected for 3 years, reading letters he should not have read, learning the shape of her mind from documents she had never intended for his eyes. The 2 weeks between that stable yard and the discovery she made at her father's desk were weeks of surface and silence. The wedding preparations were in motion. Julian's solicitors were in and out of the house with papers and instructions, and Elara moved through all of it with the stillness she had learned was her best defense against panic. She signed what she was told to sign. She stood for the dressmaker. She answered letters of congratulation in her own hand, politely, correctly, with no indication whatsoever of the specific quality of cold terror that had taken up residence behind her ribs. It was on a Thursday, 12 days before the wedding, that she found the asylum papers. She had been sent to Julian's study. She was not sure later whether this was an oversight or whether he had left her there deliberately with his characteristic cruelty as a display of what he knew she could not stop, and she was looking for a quill she had been told was in the drawer. She found the quill. She found behind it a document she was not meant to find, though she suspected that was not entirely true. The document bore the letterhead of a Dr. Pemberton of York. It was a certificate of admission for a private asylum, a good one, which meant expensive, which meant thorough. The patient's name was written in on a blank line in ink that had not yet dried completely. Elara Vance. The grounds for admission were listed in careful clinical language: nervous hysteria, delusion, unsuitability for the management of social duties. Below Dr. Pemberton's signature, Julian's signature waited, already affixed. She stood there with the quill in one hand and the paper in the other, and she did not cry. She put both hands flat on the surface of the desk and breathed in the slow, deliberate way she had taught herself to breathe when what was happening was too large to respond to immediately. She breathed for 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she understood something else. Julian didn't want her. He had never wanted her. What he wanted was the land, Blackwood's land, specifically the north pasture and the hill fields above it, which she had known for some time produced a particular grade of anthracite coal. She had seen the geological surveys in his papers on an earlier occasion and had filed the information in the back of her mind, uncertain what it meant. Now she understood precisely what it meant. He was going to marry her, strip the coal rights, commit her to Dr. Pemberton's excellent establishment, and spend the rest of his life as the sole heir to Blackwood's underground fortune. It was, in its way, an efficient plan. She could see the logic of it. She could also see that it was a death warrant with a stone chapel and a wedding breakfast attached to it. She put the paper back where she found it. She was very careful about the angle. She took the quill. She left the study and closed the door precisely as she had found it, and she went to her room and sat at her locked desk for a very long time. She needed a larger problem to fight her smaller one. The revelation about Arthur Sterling came to her at 2 o'clock in the morning, the way the worst revelations do. You are nearly asleep, and something shifts, and you are suddenly and completely awake, staring at the dark ceiling with your heart moving too fast. She had been thinking about the ghost creditor, the pattern in the debt repurchases. She had been turning it over for months. And something about the evening, the memory of scarred hands, the ink stain on the right thumb, had unlocked something she had not been able to reach before. She got up and went to her father's study. The desk there was not locked. Her father had never felt the need to lock things, which was itself a form of loss. She lit a candle, and she started with the bottom drawer. The betrothal contract was where she had expected it to be, in the leather folder behind the household accounts. She had seen it before, years ago, and had known its contents in general terms. She had not, until now, examined the mortgage documents behind it. The stack of transfer papers, the notices of purchase, the legal correspondence she had not had reason to pursue. She sat at her dead mother's writing table in the dark house at 2 in the morning, and she read for 2 hours, and she did not make a sound. Arthur Sterling, a S. Ironwood, his personal seal. She knew it from the correspondence she'd found on an earlier occasion, and not fully processed, on the purchase documentation for 3 separate Vance debts over the past 30 months. Not Julian Vane's solicitors, not some consortium of northern creditors. Arthur Sterling, Duke of Ironwood, purchasing her father's obligations one by one, quietly at market value, without pressure and without any stated intention. He had been doing it for nearly 3 years. She sat with this for a long time. She had thought since that stable yard that Arthur Sterling might be a potential avenue, that his interest in the region, his control of the finances, might mean he had some motivation to prevent Julian from acquiring the Blackwood coal, some competing interest she could appeal to. She had thought in her most desperate moments that he might be something like a rescue. What she understood now, in the dark of the night, with 3 years of documents spread across her dead mother's desk, was that there was no rescue. there was only a larger predator. Arthur Sterling had been buying her father's life systematically for 3 years, not to apply pressure, but to hold the noose in reserve. He had let the Vance estate drift deeper into obligation, while he quietly, patiently accumulated the paper that gave him control of it. He had read her letters. She was suddenly, sickeningly certain of this. Certain in the way you are certain of something that makes you want to put your head down on the table. And he had used the information in them to time his purchases perfectly. She was not a woman in distress. She was an asset being held by 2 different men for 2 different purposes. The anger that moved through her in the next several minutes was not the hot, chaotic anger of shock. It was colder than that, more useful. She went back to her room and she wrote a letter at 3 in the morning by the light of a tallow candle that kept threatening to gut her out. She burned the first 3 drafts. The 4th she addressed simply, A.S., Ironwood. And then she wrote what she had. She wrote, I know you hold my father's debts. I know you have read my correspondence with his creditors. I know you understand the value of what is under Blackwood's north pasture better than any geological survey, because you had the sense to read it through my own descriptions of it 3 years ago. I am offering you something you will not want, because a man who collects debts has no use for what I am about to offer. I am offering you the truth, all of it, including the truth about my family that you may not yet know. In exchange, I require 11 days. If you have any interest in a transaction with no financial dimension, present yourself at the impediment moment. You will know what to do with it when it comes. E. Vance. She sealed it. She woke the stable lad at 4 in the morning and paid him with the last of her pin money and told him to ride for Ironwood before dawn. Then she went back to bed and lay there with her eyes open until the light came. The pre-wedding ball was 3 days before the ceremony. It was held at Fenwick Hall and attended by everyone who was anyone in 3 counties, which was, in Elara's exhausted assessment, approximately 40 people of consequence and 30 others who were there to witness whatever consequence required witnessing. She had been dressed by Julian's selected maid in a gown she had not chosen, silver white with a low neckline and pearl pins in her hair, and she understood its purpose immediately. It was a display gown, a possession made presentable. She wore it because she had no alternative, but she wore the rusted key beneath it, and she kept her hand steady. Julian danced with her twice, which was once more than she wanted, and twice fewer than propriety technically demanded. During the second dance, he spoke to her very quietly, in the specific undertone designed to travel no further than her ear. He said he knew she had been staring at the Duke at the stable yard. He said if she spoke to Ironwood tonight, there would be consequences for Blackwood that she could not prevent. He said this without any particular heat, the way you recite a fact you have memorized. She said nothing. She had learned that Julian found silence more disconcerting than argument. Later in the evening, a formal notice was delivered to her by a servant she didn't recognize, a plain folded paper, no seal. Inside was a legal document, a foreclosure notice on Blackwood, issued by Sterling Holdings, dated for the 28th of November, the day after the wedding. She stood with it in the hallway of Fenwick Hall and understood that the noose was now tightened from both sides simultaneously. If she married Julian, the coal went to him, and she went to Dr. Pemberton's excellent establishment. If she did not marry Julian, her father's debts came due, and Arthur Sterling owned Blackwood by the end of the month. She found Arthur Sterling in the library. He was standing by the window with a glass of port he wasn't drinking, looking out at the dark gardens with the expression of a man waiting for something he is not certain will arrive. She crossed the room. She did not give herself time to consider how she looked or what her voice would do. She told him she had received his notice. She told him she understood what it was. She told him she was asking for a stay of execution, 30 days, no longer. She did not ask for charity. She asked for time. She said it quietly, and she said it precisely, and she met his eyes the whole time. He looked at her for a long moment. She had the sense he was deciding something. Then he said very quietly, "I do not give charity, Lady Elara. I only make trades." He set down the port glass and he left the room. She stood there in the library of Fenwick Hall, with the foreclosure notice in her hand and the fire dying in the grate, and she felt the cold that came up through the old stone floor, through the soles of her thin evening shoes, and she pressed the key through the silk of her dress against her side, and she breathed. 1 breath, 2, 3. She had 11 days. She had sent the letter. She had to believe he had read it. It was all she had. This is the part of the story where I ask you to stay close to me, because what happens next happens fast, and it matters, and I do not want you to miss a single word of it. Are you still with me? Good. Then let us go back to the chapel. But first, before we return to that altar, there is something else Elara discovered in those final days, something that transformed the entire shape of what she understood about herself and her world. Something that Arthur Sterling had known for months, something he had said nothing about, for reasons she was only beginning, in the cold air of that chapel, to understand. It came to light 4 days before the wedding, in the way these things sometimes do, not through a dramatic confrontation, not through a document dramatically produced, but through an old letter found in an old box in an old house. Her father's sister, Aunt Cecily, had come to stay for the wedding preparations, and Cecily was one of those women who tidied in the way some people pray, compulsively, thoroughly, as an act of devotion. And in the process of tidying the small upstairs sitting room, she had found a box of correspondence belonging to Elara's mother, Margaret, who had died 9 years ago. Cecily had brought the box to Elara without reading it, which was perhaps the kindest thing she had ever done for anyone. She had said only, "There are some papers here that perhaps you ought to look at, my dear, before everything is settled." Everything was settled, or nearly. Elara opened the box alone. Her mother's handwriting was faded but legible. The letters were arranged in order, which told her something about the kind of woman her mother had been, careful, organized, even in the things she kept hidden. The first letter was dated 1791. The last was dated 1793. They were addressed to a man named Thomas Greaves of Edinburgh, and they were love letters, except that they were also more than love letters. They were the correspondence of 2 people who had been married, quietly, in a Scottish ceremony in the autumn of 1791, before Margaret Carey became Margaret Vance in a much larger and more celebrated London ceremony in the spring of 1793. There was no evidence of a dissolution. Elara sat with this knowledge for a very long time. Her mother had been married before. A prior legal marriage, undissolved, which meant that the subsequent marriage to Edmund Vance, Earl of Blackwood, the marriage that had produced Elara, was, in the eyes of the law, irregular at best and invalid at worst. It meant that Elara's claim to legitimacy was, legally speaking, uncertain. It meant she could not, technically, inherit Blackwood. And if she could not inherit Blackwood, then the betrothal contract Julian Vane held, The contract that promised him Blackwood through marriage to the Blackwood heir was worthless. It promised him something she did not have the legal standing to give him. It also meant she was not Lady Elara Vance, heir to an earldom. She was simply Elara, daughter of a dead woman and a broken man, with nothing to her name but the knowledge in her head and the key at her hip. She sat with this for a long time. Then she went to her father. Edmund Vance received his daughter's discovery with the particular devastating expression of a man who has known something for a very long time and has been waiting with great exhaustion for the moment it surfaced. He looked at the letters in her hands, and he looked at her face, and he said very quietly, "Your mother told me, before you were born. I chose to call you mine regardless." "And the first marriage?" she asked. "Thomas Greaves died in 1794, he said. In Edinburgh. There was no dissolution because there was no need for one. He was gone. Your mother believed it was resolved." "The law does not believe that," Elara said. "No," her father said. "It does not." She went back to her room. She sat at her desk. She unlocked the drawer and she opened the ledgers, and she wrote across the top of the current page. In her own hand, in ink, she pressed into the paper hard enough to leave a trace. If he knew this, why did he stay silent? She meant the Duke. Because she had found, in the hour she had spent reconstructing the timeline of Arthur Sterling's debt purchases, a letter of inquiry, one she had missed the first time, tucked behind a duplicate transfer document. A letter dated 8 months ago, from a solicitor at Sterling Holdings to a legal firm in Edinburgh, inquiring into the records of one Thomas Greaves of that city, his marriages and estates, and any outstanding legal matters. A letter that had been answered. She had not seen the response, but she had seen the inquiry, and she understood what it meant. He knew. He had known for 8 months. He had known that the betrothal contract was void. He had known that she was technically free of Julian Vane, and he had said nothing. He had given her the foreclosure notice. He had told her he only made trades. He had watched her bleed, and he had held the truth in his pocket like a stone, and he had said nothing. She lay awake the night before the wedding, and she thought about why. She did not arrive at an answer she could bear. And then she stood at the altar in a gown the colour of old cream, and the priest asked if there was any impediment, and Arthur Sterling drew a breath. She waited. The candles ran. He did not speak. And in the silence that stretched past 5 seconds and into 6, and towards something that would be impossible to walk back from, something moved in Elara Vance. Something that had been building for 8 months and 11 days, and 4 drafts of a letter, and 1 night of reading in the dark, and years before that, of touching a key that unlocked nothing, of breathing when breathing was the only option left. She turned from the altar, not to Julian, not to the priest, not to the door. She turned to Arthur Sterling, and she looked at him across the cold air of St. Cuthbert's Chapel, and she spoke. This is the moment. She is small in the space of the chapel, and she is wearing a dress she did not choose, and every person in those 40 pews can hear her perfectly. Her voice is steady. It is the steadiest it has ever been, which is perhaps the most remarkable thing about this moment, that she is most fully herself in the instant she is giving everything up. She says, "You've waited for this moment, Your Grace. You stood in this chapel and you held your breath, and you kept your silence, and you watched, and you let me bleed for weeks, and you have had the truth in your pocket like a stone. You knew. You have known for 8 months what you could have told me in 8 seconds. So speak it now. Tell them I am no lady. Tell them the contract is worth nothing. Tell them my mother's first marriage makes me nameless in the law's eyes. Tell them I am the daughter of a bigamist and a gambler, with nothing to my name but the breath in my lungs and the words on my tongue. Tell them all of it. I would rather be a beggar in the open street with my name intact than a duchess in a house where the truth is another debt owed to the man who holds the paper. She reaches up with both hands and takes the lace veil from her head. She holds it for a moment. Then she lets it fall at Julian Vane's feet. Julian is looking at her the way he has never looked at her before, because she has never done anything he did not expect. His face does a complicated thing, then it hardens, and Arthur Sterling walks forward. He walks past the priest. He walks past the altar rail. He walks in the specific way of a man who has made a decision and is no longer managing the distance between himself and it. There are 40 people watching. He does not look at any of them. He looks only at Elara. He takes her hand. Not gently, with a grip that is solid and warm and completely certain, the grip of a man who has, in this moment, stopped calculating. He says in a voice that fills the stone chapel without effort, "The impediment is that the lady is already under my protection, and I find I have a sudden distaste for the way you breathe her air, Vane." Julian makes a sound. It is not a sentence. Arthur does not acknowledge it. He is still looking at Elara. She is still looking at him. And this, she will think later, this moment, where they are both simply looking at each other in a burning room of their own making. This is the moment something shifts between them from transaction to something she does not yet have a name for, but that feels in the cavity of her chest like a door unlocking. The vestry is a small room off the left side of the nave, used for pre-ceremony preparations and now for the aftermath of the single most dramatic event St. Cuthbert's Chapel had witnessed in 40 years. There is a table and 2 chairs, and a window that looks out onto the churchyard, where old yew trees stand in the rain. The noise from the chapel, 40 people discovering their voices simultaneously, is muffled but present. Elara sits in one of the chairs. Arthur stands by the window. He does not look at the churchyard. He looks at his own hands, the way he looked at them when he thought no one was watching at the stable yard 3 weeks ago that feels like 3 years ago. She says, "You are going to tell me you did it for my own good." He says, "I am not." She says, "You are going to tell me you were protecting me." He says, "I was not protecting you. I was watching you. There is a difference that I should have noticed sooner." She waits. He turns from the window. His face, in the grey light of the vestry and the November rain, has lost the coldness she catalogued on their first meeting. Not entirely. She does not think the coldness will ever entirely leave him, and she is no longer certain she would want it to. But it is changed. Something in him has been reached, the way the crack in the stable wall lets the water in, and she can see it. He says, "I found your mother's letters 8 months ago. I know what they mean in law." I sat with that knowledge, and I told myself I was waiting to see what you would do. I told myself it was a test, whether you would choose dignity or freedom, the title or the truth. I am very good at telling myself things that sound like strategy and are in fact fear. She is very still in the vestry chair. Fear of what? He is quiet for a long moment. The rain finds the old glazing of the churchyard window and traces slow lines down the glass. Then he says, and his voice is different, quieter, rougher at the edges. "Fear that if you knew you were free, you would simply go. That the only reason you ever wrote that letter to me was because you needed something, and the moment you ceased to need something, I would cease to exist in any way that mattered to you. She looks at him for a very long time. She thinks about the girl who stood in the stable yard and said, "I am not a creature for your wagering," and walked back through the mud alone. She thinks about the woman who sat at her dead mother's writing table at 2 a.m. with a candle that kept almost going out. She thinks about 12 letters she wrote to keep a broken man's house standing all those years, none of which she wrote for anyone but love and duty, and the strange, unglamorous stubbornness of a person who refuses to stop mattering. She says, "Give me the papers." He does not pretend not to understand. He reaches into his coat. He has been carrying them, she realizes, she does not know since when, and he places on the table between them a legal document. The foreclosure deed, Blackwood, his seal at the bottom, and beside it a pen. He says, "It is yours. Not as a duchess, not as a trade, not as anything but yours. Go if you want to go. Stay if you want to stay. I have no more trades to make." She picks up the pen. She signs the deed. She sits with the pen in her hand for another moment, and she looks at this man who has been the largest and most exhausting complication of the worst year of her life, and she says, "You were afraid of being no use to me." He says very quietly, "Yes. You spent 3 years being useful to me without my knowledge, buying my father's debts so that you had a reason to be in the room. Yes. You are the most absurd man I have ever encountered," she says. He does not disagree. Outside, Julian Vane is in the process of discovering that the legal ground beneath his boots is less solid than he had built his life on. The void in the betrothal contract, Elara's illegitimacy, and therefore her inability to convey Blackwood through marriage, is not a secret Arthur Sterling will keep. The solicitors will know by morning. Julian knows it already. He left the chapel by the side door and did not look at anyone on his way out. The 40 people in the pews are still talking. They will be talking for months. They will have opinions about Elara Vance, about her birth, her name, her conduct, the scene at the altar, and she knows it, and she finds that she has very little room left in her for the opinions of rooms she is not in. She has Blackwood. She has her name, not Lady Vance, not Duchess of Ironwood, just Elara, which was always the most important part of it anyway. She has a rusted key that still fits nothing, pressed against her hip. The door to the vestry is still open. She can hear the chapel behind her. She can hear the rain. Arthur Sterling is still standing by the window, waiting for her to speak or stand or leave, and she can hear that too. His patience, which is new and does not yet come easily to him and costs him something she can see him paying. She stands up. She says, "I will need 6 months to determine whether I can stand you." He says, "I have been standing you for 3 years. 6 months is a mercy." She looks at him. The corner of her mouth does a thing she does not try to stop. She picks up the deed and she folds it into her bodice, against her skin, and she walks out of the vestry and back through the stone chapel with its guttered candles and its whispering congregation and its damp lily smell, and she walks out into the November rain. And she does not look back. She does not need to. Here is what happened after. Julian Vane engaged 3 solicitors and spent 8 months trying to challenge the contract void. He lost. He spent most of what remained of his money on the legal fees and the rest on a passage to France, and he was not heard from again in the north of England for as long as anyone kept count, which turned out to be not very long. Edmund Vance spent the winter at Blackwood. In the spring, his health improved in the specific way it tends to improve for men who no longer carry the daily weight of imminent ruin, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. He sat in the garden on the days when the moor was gentle and the light was good. And sometimes Elara sat with him, and they talked about his wife in a way they had never allowed themselves to before. And it was difficult and necessary, and it was love. The coal under the north pasture was leased, not sold, to a mining consortium Elara negotiated with herself over the objections of several gentlemen who felt that the terms she was proposing were sharper than anything they had seen from a woman, to which she did not respond in words. Arthur Sterling spent a year courting Elara. He spent a year courting Elara in a manner that no one in the north could entirely categorize, because it did not look like any courtship they had seen before. He came to Blackwood on Tuesdays and sat on the front step while she did the morning accounts, and they argued about the coal lease and the drainage on the east field, and occasionally about literature, which he read more than anyone suspected, and she read voraciously and without apology. He brought her maps of the shipping routes, and she corrected them twice. He lost his iron reputation slowly, and gained something else in its place that he did not have a word for yet, but that made him better at everything he did. He asked for her opinion on his mines, and she gave it precisely without softening, and he used it. He did not ask her to marry him for 11 months. When he did, he asked her on the front steps of Blackwood in October in the early morning, while she was still holding her ledger and had ink on her left hand, and he did not kneel or produce a ring or make a speech. He simply said he had found that he was better at everything when he knew she was in the world, and that if she could bear him, he would very much like to be in her world specifically. She said she would think about it. She took 3 weeks. Then she said yes. The wedding was in April in the garden at Blackwood, with 12 people present, and Elara wore a dress she had chosen herself, the colour of new leaves, with no lace at the wrists at all. There was no impediment. There is a desk in the eastern study at Blackwood now, not her father's desk, which is in the library and belongs to Edmund still, but her desk, which she had brought from her childhood room and repaired and placed in the morning light. The drawer is locked. The key to it lives on a ribbon around her waist, alongside a small rusted key that fits nothing, that she has carried for years. She touches the rusted one sometimes, out of habit, out of affection for the woman she was when she needed it, the woman who learned to keep her own company, who could breathe through unbearable things, who wrote letters by candlelight to creditors who did not know they were falling in love with her mind. The useful key turns easily. The drawer opens to a set of ledgers with her name on the spines. Not Lady Vance, not the Duchess of Ironwood, but Elara Sterling, which is who she is now and was always going to be. A woman who chose herself first, and then chose the man who understood why that was not a small thing. Arthur is in the doorway sometimes when she is working. He leans against the frame in the way of a man who has learned that waiting is not weakness, who has learned that the best things do not arrive on a schedule. He watches her work. He does not interrupt. He waits for her to finish, and when she looks up, he is there. And then they walk out onto the moor together, into whatever the light is doing, into whatever the weather has decided to be. She does not hurry. She never hurries. She has a life that belongs to her now, every corner of it, every acre, every cold morning and every decent evening. She has learned to want things she is not ashamed of wanting. She has learned that freedom is not the absence of obligation, but the choosing of which obligations are worth keeping. She keeps her father. She keeps the land. She keeps the man in the doorway. She keeps the rusted key. It still fits nothing. She would not change that for the world. We often imagine that being chosen is the great gift, to be seen and selected and wanted by someone with the power to make the choice feel like a prize. Elara Vance had been chosen since she was 6 years old, chosen into a contract she did not sign, chosen into a role she did not audition for, chosen into the particular cage that well-meaning social arrangement builds for women who are assets before they are people. And she learned, through the coal and the letters and the chapel and the vestry and the long, argumentative, honest year that followed, that the only choice that matters is the one you make for yourself, when the alternative is easier, when the cost of the true thing is high, when the world is asking you to be a footnote, and you decide quietly and permanently to be the author instead. This story was for you. If you have ever felt the weight of a promise you did not make, if you have ever stood at an altar of someone else's design, in a dress that was chosen for you, with your hands flat on a surface, and your breath counted out in careful seconds, because the thing happening was too large to face any other way. Your value is not in your title. It is not in your contract, or your name, or the thing you were promised to when you were too young to understand what promising meant. It is in the truth you carry, and the letters you write, and the key you keep for no reason, except that losing it would mean losing something of yourself, and you have decided, without quite articulating it until now, that you are not willing to do that. If you found something of your own story in Elara's, I am glad. And if you would like more stories like this one, long, slow, careful, the kind that take their time with the parts that matter, then I hope you will subscribe to Whispered Thrones and join the circle of people who believe that 90 minutes is not too long to spend on a story that is trying to tell you the truth. Until we meet again, some silences are meant to be broken, especially the ones we keep within ourselves, and some keys held long enough find their doors.